Some moments can shape an entire premiership, some can shape an entire century. European leaders descended hastily on the Élysée Palace in Paris today to wrestle with the magnitude of the problem handed to them, not just by the President of Russia, but by their ally, the President of the United States. Sowing the seeds ahead of this summit, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk set the tone for expectation. Vast uplifts in defence spending across an entire continent.
To musi stać się teraz.
It has to happen now in a very massive way. I'm talking about decisions, about financing, logistics, political decisions when it comes to the defensive capabilities of the European Union and the European countries.
At an undisclosed location in the UK, Ukrainian troops are being trained how to fight and survive on the front lines. But despite 3 years of support from across Europe, the US has largely shut out allies from the conversations with Russia over a prospective peace deal. European leaders are peddling desperately to remain relevant, the purpose of today's summit. But at last week's security conference in Munich, this senator and vice president of the French Defence Committee was left in no uncertain terms as to how the US views future European involvement.
You have no place. There was actually a lunch called Ukrainian lunch I attended, and the special envoy by Donald Trump was extremely clear. The question was put to him, will the EU be part of the negotiations? And he said no. You don't have
as stark as that.
Oh, it was incredible. That's why I think, you know, we actually, it's the new style. What we're getting from the boss, the Europeans do not have a place at the table.
The suspicion is that any peacekeeping mission in Ukraine could rely heavily on UK troops. Troops, one former head of the armed forces says the nation simply doesn't have enough of. And despite pledges of raising the percentage of GDP spent on defence, former chiefs say the uplift needs to be major.
Now, 5% will never get back to 5% in any short order, but just fiddling around about, are we going to increase from 2.3% to 2.5%? That, frankly, just doesn't fill the potholes in. It doesn't touch the sides. There's got to be an increase in this country to more like 3 to 3.5% over the next 5 years or so. And that money's got to be spent wisely and sensibly. And certainly, if the Prime Minister is thinking of committing a British ground force to a peacekeeping operation in Ukraine, we're going to significantly have to increase defence spending and do it pretty quickly.
The feeling now among many, the very foundations of NATO itself have been shaken.
So if Russian tanks rolled into Estonia tomorrow, would you have absolute confidence that Donald Trump, as a NATO partner, would be standing shoulder to shoulder with Estonia, with the rest of Europe?
At this point in time, no.
The post-Soviet era has been defined by Western nations reaping a peace dividend. The message from today's summit is clear. The dividends have dried up. It's increased investment that's needed now.
Last week there was disbelief among EU leaders and diplomats. This week there is a dawning realisation rippling across the continent that the world they find themselves in now is very different to the world of just 7 days ago. And the moment we're told that has crystallised this for them was the Munich Security Conference at the end of last week. Not the big set-piece speeches by the likes of J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, but the countless smaller conversations that politicians, diplomats were having on the corridors and side rooms with members of Donald Trump's team. What they heard, they told us, was a unified message, that this wasn't just hyperbole, that Donald Trump's vision of the world is very different to anything they've heard from the US president since the formation of NATO in 1949. The problem they face now is that, well, to spend more on defence, that money's got to be found from somewhere. That's not just a problem in the UK, but across Europe. And second of all, you might decide today that you want to spend more on defence, but acquiring defence equipment and training personnel takes a lot of time. And despite what we've heard from the summit that was hastily organised today, what we haven't heard from anyone is how they solve either of those two problems.
Paul McNamara in Paris.